Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming to the College of Public Service Brown Bag Research Series. I am Dr. Cynthia George. I'm a professor in the College of Public Service and the social work program, and I am so proud to bring you the work of two of my students today. We're going to be hearing about their analysis of a social movement. And to start it off, I'm actually going to introduce the model just a little bit. And so I'm going to share my screen. I've got some PowerPoint slides for you. And I've got a big, huge monitor, so I'm going to leave mine in the PowerPoint frame instead of hitting slideshow. Can everybody see okay? Okay. So we are going to hear from Takajya Clayton here in a moment. She did her study on the prison abolition movement. And then we're going to hear from Mary Pollard. She studied the Kidfluencing movement, right? Or the movement to make money off of your child's image on social media and talk about ways that social work as a discipline should interact with those movements, right? And so I'm a little bit about a social movement, right? And so we use Blumer's model of what a social movement is. I'm going to pop that link in the chat if you want to read more about that. But Henry Blumer was a famous sociologist, and he said that movements basically occurred in four primary stages. One was the emergent stage, where there is some sort of desire among people in a societal group for something, right? Like there's generally some sense of relative deprivation where they feel one group is getting something, we're not getting something. And so we're going to stand up and try to get what we're supposed to get, right? Or be treated the way we're supposed to be treated, or change social structures in some sort of a way. And so emergence is when the movement first kicks off. For example, if you take Black Lives Matter as an example, the emergence was really the murder of Trayvon Martin and the public's reaction to that. Now, there are multiple things that might have led up to that, right? Where it's not like that was the first time a Black child had been harmed by the police or by, I guess it was a security guard. But it was not the first time but that was a time when people took to the streets, right? Which moves us to coalescence. And that's where the popularity of that movement, or that desire to be treated differently or to have different things, that desire coalesces across a larger group. And so it's not just one or two people, there's more leaders that emerge. And then after that, if the needs are enduring, then that movement will formalize in a stage that Blumer called bureaucratization. Not everybody has to be able to pronounce that, right? But that was when your movement would start to develop formal leaders. Maybe they would create a list of demands, right? Or a list of goals. Maybe they would, people would write books about it, or peer-reviewed journal articles even about the tactics that the movements would use, right? But these are things that formalize the social movement because it's an enduring need. And then there's a stage called decline. And decline was complicated because it doesn't necessarily mean failure. It could mean that your movement is being repressed, right? Like Black Lives Matter was definitely repressed. A lot of their individual techniques, like blocking traffic, right, that was criminalized. People were running them down in the street, right? And so they were also called a terrorist organization, right? And there were all these sorts of things to try to stop or quell that movement. There's also co-optation, right? There were people that tried to come in and co-opt or take the power, like Blue Lives Matter. There was even a Clown Lives Matter, right? Where people that dressed as clowns were trying to say that they were being harmed, right? I mean, but they were trying to co-opt that all lives matter, right? And take away from the Black Lives Matter mission. And then sometimes you decline because you succeed. Right. And so, for example, the March of Dimes, right? Like they really formed around polio. But when polio was essentially eradicated, from our society, then they kind of ceased to be, right? And or they actually developed kind of a new mission and they've been kind of lurking. And unfortunately, with the change around vaccines, polio might be coming back. And so maybe we'll need the March of Dimes to resurge, right? But that's how these social movements work over time is they wax and they wane, right? And sometimes they lie dormant and sometimes they come back. But you can also get established with the mainstream, right? And so it's not really a social movement anymore because you have successfully become part of that. And then one more, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to let my students talk. But we also use the Lumen Learning Lab, which I will drop that in the chat. It provides in-depth sort of analysis of different ways of thinking about social movements. And generally, you can classify them based on how much change are they asking for and who are they wanting to change, right? And so like for example, like when the everybody was trying to save the turtles and get rid of plastic straws, that was a very small change, right? It was just specific individuals. They were going after business owners really and trying to get them to no longer order plastic straws and instead order paper straws. And it worked for a minute. They got some business owners to do that, but for the most part, everyone hated the paper straws and we're kind of back to plastic straws, right? And so sometimes those smaller movements may or may not accomplish the change you want to see. But like if you were trying to get all those restaurant owners to no longer use styrofoam, right? Then that might be a more radical change, or because it's not just straws, it's their entire packaging line, right? And or maybe you are like if you want to change everyone, like if you think about recycling programs, all the first one is just limited change. We just want you to put your recycling into a different bin, right? And so that was a limited change, but they wanted everyone to do it versus something like we want everyone to plant a food garden in your yard, right? That is a much bigger change, right? But you're going to get your movement operates different based on who you're asking to change and how much change you're asking them to do. And then the last thing is I am going to stop this share and I am going to share this other beautiful thing here, which is the Creating Change Journal. And I want to give a shout out to Megan Huberry and Lori Danley, who was the embedded librarian and the embedded writing tutor that worked with these students. Also, we'll shout out Julie Husky, who was the embedded librarian that worked with all the prior students. But this is the Creating Change Journal. Glenda Alvin, the director of the library, has actually encouraged me to start this, where we have published all of my students' work. And not all of them will publish their papers. It takes a certain bravery for a student to publish their paper. This is volume 7 from last year. Deborah Gear Gately published her paper on street art. She also presented that paper at the International Council on Social Work Education Conference in Denver, and she did an amazing job. And then we create zines in the class, right? So students are using those theories to analyze a social movement. They write a paper, they create a zine, and then they do a presentation, which I'm about to shut up and let you see the presentations. But I just want to show you real quick what a zine is. Right, and this is how it gets published in the journal. They get a pretty little title page, and then this is a zine, and they fold up into little booklets like this, right? And so it's like a one-page mini zine, and it gives them little artistic expression, and some creativity, because social movements don't work without that creativity. And social movements will often have that bottom up change where artists and influencers are the ones that are driving the change in society. Okay, Any questions about any of that? Okay. We're gonna turn it over to the students, and the plan is they're both gonna talk for about 7 to 10 minutes about their social movement. And then Takajya is gonna go first, and then Mary is gonna go, and then we will open up the floor to questions for everyone. Does that work? All right, Takajya, you are on.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon and hello, everybody. My name is Takajya Clayton, and I am presenting today on the prison abolition movement. So I'm going to pull that up. Okay. And this is kind of a unique movement if you're thinking about it, because this movement is asking for the complete eradication of prisons and the police system and really how you think about punishment. This movement is not about necessarily reform because they're not asking, oh, let's train the police officers better, or let's make the prisons better. No, they're asking us to completely reinvent the way we think about how to get people help and how, we can make people better without sending them to prison for a specific amount of time. So I just wanted to say that before I got started. And on the next slide, I have a quick video to kind of get you paint the picture of why this movement is so important today.
Mass incarceration is warehousing the potential of millions of American citizens, perpetuating old racial injustices and shortchanging taxpayer with an immense price tag. Frequently, I encounter those who struggle to move forward after being incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. And there are millions more who could tell similar stories of frustration, denied opportunity, and despair. While our nation is home to 5% of the world's population, we house nearly 25% of its prisoners. The federal prison population has increased by nearly 800% over the past 30 years. The explosion of America's prison population is strongly correlated with the so-called war on drugs. There are more people incarcerated today for drug offenses alone than all the people incarcerated in 1970 when the war on drugs began. Nearly three-fourths of the federal prison population is comprised of nonviolent offenders. The U.S. spends over $250 billion a year on the criminal justice system. Imagine where we would be as a country if we could take just a fraction of that and spend it on infrastructure projects to fix our crumbling roads and bridges. Or if we were able to spend some of the $250 billion improving education for our kids. African Americans and Latinos are far more likely to be arrested for selling or possessing drugs, even though studies have shown that African Americans and whites use drugs at the same rate, and whites are actually more likely to sell drugs. What's worst of all is that more incarceration does not necessarily lead to fewer crimes. This is Senator Cory Booker. If you agree it's time to rethink mass incarceration, share this video with your friends.
I thought that was a pretty cool video to kind of show you I like the illustrations because it really break down the issue of mass incarceration and kind of paints the picture as to why this movement was needed in the first place.
Matt?
Ooh, hold on. I don't know what happened. Can y'all still hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Yep.
I'm sorry, my computer screen just completely went blank.
We can still see your screen.
Oh,
Try hitting escape. Did that change anything?
no. Oh, there we go. Sorry, guys.
Okay.
Okay. Let me get back on here. I don't know why that happened. Hmm.
It's hard sometimes when you're sharing your screen just
Yes.
to stop and show a video and then go back and
Back, yes.
yeah, you just got caught in the The robots are
Yeah,
revolting.
they're trying to stop me, but it's okay. We're gonna keep moving. So, like that video said, the war on drugs really start the emergence of this movement, start, the issues. The prison population increased by 1.3 million by 1990 and later 2 million by 2000. So, think about the people who are experiencing this in real time, the war on drugs. Their family members are being arrested and given lengthy sentences for maybe a little bit of drugs on their persons, so this is starting the discontent. This is starting, this is a problem that 1 million people in the span of 10 years has entered into the prison system. So people, are getting upset about this and starting to realize, hey, we have to do something about this. And this is where critical resistance comes into play. This is the original flyer from 1998, where they say, hey, let's get together and figure out how can we come up with a system to, stop this system from putting people in prison for, crimes that maybe they don't really deserve to go there. So critical resistance was founded in 1997, and their first conference occurred in 1998. And if you can see the flyer, this movement doesn't have a specific leader or a set person who is the figurehead, but they do have notable people who is involved in this movement, like Angela Y. Davis, who, experienced imprisonment herself. So she is really involved in this movement, and she does a lot of presentations and talks and writes books about, the problem of mass incarceration. So this is the coalescence era where, they're starting to come up with a way to stop this mass incarceration problem. And the critical resistance organization, they sought to end the prison industrial complex by challenging the belief that caging and controlling people makes us safe. And for some background, the prison industrial complex is a term we use to describe the overlapping interests of government industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as a solution to economic, social, and political problems. The prison industrial complex is a political vision with the goal of eliminating imprisonment, policing, and surveillance, and creating lasting alternatives to punishment and imprisonment. So this is the goal of critical resistance. They want to end surveillance, they want to end policing, and they want to end imprisonment. And really, the money that we are putting into these institutions, their plan is to put this money into education, put this money into, mental health programs, or into any other thing that doesn't involve Cajun people. And these are your pillars of abolition. So the first is to stop building cages. And I think this is a problem that is ever evolving, they'll stop one prison from opening and then they're trying to open another. So this is the problem with abolitionism. That's not really problem, but this is the ever evolving, nature of their fight. Because they are closed to prisons, and then now in today's time, you have the ICE facilities opening. So the fight is kind of forever because they're constantly trying to get the government, get these organizations from stop building cages. And then you have decarceration. So their next goal is to get people out of prison who are not a threat to society. So when you talk about those drug crimes or those drug offenses, or petty crimes that people really, with some help, with some investment into their lives, that maybe prison isn't an option. They could go through a program, they could, get some education or anything else other than locking them up and putting them in prison and then potentially having them, being indoctrinated into that system. And then lastly, we have excarceration, which they have the goal of transforming society to divert individuals from potentially entering the prison system. So this last goal is maybe the biggest one because this is about really changing how society thinks about, people who are going into the prison system. So like I said, putting more money into education, putting more money into mental health, that is really the big goal here. So how did they move from the next level of just, saying we need to do something to a wide scale organization movement? So with the prison abolition movement, this is across the nation. They have so many different organizations doing different things that uphold the pillars that I recently talked about. So you have the Let Us Breathe Collective, and this is a collective of artists and activists who envision a world without policing and prison, and they're based in Chicago. So they really do the things that help keep people out of prison. They have a garden where they help to feed people, the homeless. Like they do a lot of things to help uphold the pillars here, mainly as excarceration. Then you have the Movement for Black Lives, and it's an abolitionist group that created a space for Black-led organizations to come together to fight harm against their communities. Then you have the No Kids in Prison movement, which falls under this movement, and it was created by the Youth First Justice Collaborative. And this is to end really prisons for youth altogether. They want to end all prisons for youth and really put that money into other avenues. Then you have the White Birds Cahoots, and they assist in crisis situations without involving the police. So I know you guys watching the news, you always hear these cases where a person was in crisis and the police come and they kind of escalate that situation. So they have started this organization where they are, wanting to be the first on the scene and really help the people without involving the police. And that also upholds the pillar of excarceration because they are doing things to prevent people from getting involved with that system altogether. And I wanted to specifically put in some organizations that are based here in Tennessee. I live in Nashville, so I follow a lot of these organizations. Nashville PSL, found on Instagram, they're a party for socialism and liberation. And they're really a great organization because they post all things Nashville, they post all the protests, they keep you informed on the mayor is trying to implement some surveillance thing for Nashville, but they're fighting against it. So they really post a lot of things that if you want to be more involved in a movement like this, you can. Then you have the Black Alliance for Peace. They're also based in Nashville, Decarcerate Memphis. All these organizations are working towards those pillars of abolition. And like I said, this is a movement that will forever evolve and revolve around new things that pop up. So they'll have pockets of success. Governor Newsom of California plans to close 2 state-run prisons, and there's an effort to get him to close 8 more prisons. And this is being led by the Critical Resistance organization. And then in Kansas, they closed some youth correctional facilities and they pledged the money that was going into those facilities to be invested back into the community. So you have these pockets of success. You have representatives who are introducing bills that advance decarceration. And then the notorious Rikers Island received a shutdown deadline for 2027. So that's really major because we all know and hear the horror stories out of Rikers. And yeah, that prison should not be operating. So they have a shutdown notice of 2027. And I was reading up on this just to, see what's still going on with this. And they are not set to meet their deadline according to studies because they have to move these people somewhere else. And yeah, so that is the fight that they will have to continue. So they have the deadline, but are they going to honor it, and still shut down? So this fight will be for a long time. And if you want to learn more about this movement, here's some literature and media that you can watch. You have The 13th, directed by Ava on Netflix. It really details the criminalization of African Americans in the U.S. prison boom. Then you have literature by Angela Y. Davis. She has many books. I didn't want to fill it up with all of her books, but Our Prison actually is, I think the most important one to read if you want to really get into this movement. You have The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. And all these medias, it's so much out there that you really could get into because this movement has been going on for a long time and it will likely be here for a long time because, the fight is ever evolving. Now you have to stop ICE from building facilities and arresting people who don't deserve to be in prison, most of them because, I think about the story here in Nashville where that reporter who reported on ICE, she was arrested because they say she missed her appointment. And it was a fight to even just get her out of prison. And, she was a mom. She don't have a criminal record. These people do not deserve to be detained and put into prison when there's other alternatives that, that we could use before reaching that level. But thank you. This is my presentation on prison abolition. I hope you all learned something today.
Thank you very much. And I did pop Takajya's zine into the chat just to pop it up on the screen here. She did a great job, and you can see it looks like it's upside down because it's made to be printed and folded, right? But she did highlight the three pillars of the abolition movement. And yeah, so great job with that, and look for her paper to be published soon. And it'll be volume 8 of the Creating Change Journal. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Pollard, who is going to speak about Kidfluencing.
Hello, hello, everyone. Let me try and get my screen up and running without doing the multiple faces thing. Hold on. Share this window right here. All right. How does that look? Does that look correct? Are we there?
Yeah. Yes.
Perfect. 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 Okay, so thank you guys so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here. This has been kind of a passion project for me, and the more that I dig, the more I find and the more fascinated I get. I'm talking about kidfluencers and the costs of monetizing children. I'm probably going to go pretty quickly through these first few slides to get to the part that I'm the most passionate about. So feel free to let me know if you want a copy of my slides or any of the information. I'd be happy to send it to you, but I am going to go pretty quickly. So I want to talk about what a kidfluencer is. So a kidfluencer is anyone under the age of 18, but they're often younger than 13, whose online content has a significant enough following that they influence buyer behaviors and they generate income, often through monetization and sponsorship. The movement has its feet in a lot of places. It's a pretty broad one. So it's reformative. It addresses structures that not only allow but reward monetizing children online. It's innovative because part of what they're trying to do is change technology and patterns. While the movement itself is relatively new, it does have roots in child labor laws and the protection of children, and a pretty deep history of children being exploited in media for as long as there's been media. The movement also tends to be both global and individual. So we've got some people who are really focusing on broad policy. We're changing platforms and ideologies. And then we have other individuals who are really focusing on specific individual behavior. Like, why do we engage with content about children? How do we change individual acceptance of the monetization of children? So history, as long as there's been entertainment, children have been exploited. This is a thing that we know. One thing that's going to keep coming up is Coogan's laws, which is a pretty famous law protecting child entertainers. Jackie Coogan, known as Uncle Fester, famously, by the time he was old enough to claim his income from working as a child star, his parents had spent it. So they came up with these trusts that are called Coogan's laws that protect child entertainer income. However, that does not apply to child influencers, but it is kind of an example of, as long as we've been able to monetize children, we have. Federal child labor laws have a lot of loopholes, specifically about kidfluencers. If I'm going to track kind of how the movement grew organically, I think it goes back to the mommy bloggers. In the early 2000s, we kind of had this moment of Vine and Charlie Bit My Finger and America's Funniest Home Video. And it felt like good, clean fun at the time of, these funny short videos of children. But they were making money off of these children's images. And a lot of times it was done without consent and involved a lot of embarrassing things for these kids that we didn't really think too hard about. So then we kind of get to the realization and the recognition of, oh no, we have a problem, which for me was the crimes and the predators. So these are three examples of some big crimes that we had that kind of like cannonballed into the social consciousness. they are not the only ones. There are several kind of really messy crimes that involve kidfluencer families. It tends to create an environment where I personally believe it actually encourages neglect and abuse just because of the dynamic and the way that we are monetizing these children's behaviors. And it becomes this cycle of we're going to strip their autonomy, we're going to monitor everything they do, they become the primary breadwinner, and then also content that is engaged with often is embarrassing or potentially dangerous, but that gets more clicks, which gets you more money. So it kind of becomes this really icky cycle. The other thing that's really icky is the predators. It's something that you can't ignore when it comes to kidfluencing. Kidfluencers are particularly endangered by online predators because they are out there to make money, and their parents and their guardians have them easily accessible. So the Premier Law Group and also the FBI did a really intense study on the people who are engaging with child content. So the stats are on there. They're really gross. My least favorite one was there was a forum or a thread they found on Telegram where individuals were saving and sharing images and videos of kidfluencer creators and sending them back and forth. And they talk about it's like a candy store. Thank God for these mom influencers, all of these really kind of easy access to their preferred targets. And that kind of woke everybody up and we were like, oh no, like this is becoming or is a real thing. Coalescence of the movement. So it's a diffuse leadership. It's a modern social movement. So there is no official like head, but we find that there are several leaders who've showed up. Chris McCarthy is one of my absolute just sheroes of the movement. She's got a website called Quit Clicking Kids, which raises awareness about child exploitation online. That is a phenomenal resource if anyone wants more information. Shreya Nalamothu is very interesting. At 13 during lockdown, she kind of got involved in the kidfluencing legal space and realized that there was a real gap in the policies for protecting children. And she wrote to her senator. And that actually led to her state being the first to have a child influencer law on the books. Other movement leaders tend to be children who have now grown out of the kidfluencing movement. They're adults now, and they've become very vocal about the exploitation that they experienced and the ramifications of living that life. Demi Lovato is a really prime example. And then we also have several authors who have written books like Growing Up Shared. These leaders kind of go with the movement two different ways. So we've got some that look at big policy legal changes and restricting platforms and child labor laws. And then we also have those who do the more ideological shift. Why do we monetize children? How do we stop it? How do we stop making that so interesting and lucrative for people? Bureaucratization. So the UN Convention of Rights on Children does not actually address kidfluencing, but it does give us a really good framework for showing us the rights that are at risk, which are primarily privacy, freedom of expression, right to consent, freedom from economic exploitation, and freedom from harm. So we've got 5 really big rights that are kind of at risk. In the USA, child labor laws are also decided by the state. Only 32 states have child entertainment laws at all. Most of them do not apply to kidfluencers specifically. The ones that do exist, so Coogan's Law is the one that I referenced earlier. That's primarily for children who work in television and movies, but it can be stretched. But the guardian has to set that up. There are similar laws that are trust accounts. Some states have some laws. So Illinois, the one that I talked to Shreya Nalamothu, they had their first child influencer law in 2023. Washington has a law about compensation and consent. Europe has a really interesting law called the right to be forgotten. So where children can actually, when they become adults, go and remove their content. Like I said, Quit Clicking Kids has a phenomenal resource base. They actually track each state, the laws that are trying to be passed and kind of where they are in the process. This is my favorite part. So the movement decline, we're kind of in the middle of it right now. There's kind of an active fight going on all around. the way that social work can engage with the movement currently, I think that it can engage on micro, meso, and macro practice levels. So, micro practice, if you're working with individual clients, CBT and ACT therapies are really highly recommended because we're having to do a lot of reframing. We're having to do a lot of appropriate soothing and regulation techniques because a lot of children who have been engaged in this field have become completely cut off from their own autonomy and their own needs and advocating for themselves. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to give them back their own agency and autonomy. There's also options for family-based interventions. So either before, during, or after, you can work with a family to say, how do we protect your children's rights if this is something you're going to engage in? Meso practice, there's a lot of support groups that you can find. Essex Law School did a really great job coming up with a safety webinar series and a content toolkit for families who are going to do this. And then macro practice is policy stuff. Interestingly, the law that is most applicable currently is the NCAA's image laws, which would allow children to be paid for and put some parameters around how their image is used to make money. We could extend labor laws to include child content creation as work, because currently it isn't. And that would change a lot of things. Another big push is for uniform laws so that families don't do what's known as domicile shopping, where they hop to a state with lower regulations so that they can do more. Future research, I'm really fascinated by what it does to be observed constantly. Um, I would be really, really curious to see if there was a way to kind of document the impact that has on the growing mind. And I think that that's something that's not necessarily going to change with social media continuing its kind of pervasiveness. And then I also would love to gather more data on influencer families to kind of figure out their impetus and why they do what they do. So that's the full kind of presentation, all of my stuff. If you have any questions, please let me know. Here's my little reference list. And like I said, if you want any of the slides or any information, please reach out. I'm happy to send it. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Mary. Great job. I'm just going to pop your zine up here for a moment. She does have references in her mini zine. I love it. You're so scholarly, and you presented all of that very well. Both of you did a great job. All right, I would like to open the floor up for questions or comments. Who has something to say to our speakers today? Go ahead, Meg.
I just want to say thank you for presenting on two such interesting and important topics. And it's actually really encouraging to me to know that there is a movement about, I knew more about the first presentation, but learn more. But I didn't even know if there was a movement to help kidfluencers, so to say. And so it's actually encouraging that that exists, because I knew that for the people that work in Hollywood when they're children, there have been those advances made thanks to people's hard work. But, and Dr. George knows this, that I have some observation of people who are in this space and children that are in this space, and it is terrifying to me. So just thank you for bringing that information out. And it's good to know, because it is so much harder when people are distributed. It's not happening in a formal place, in a physical place that's outside the home, right? Everything that happens in the home is so much a part of, in our world, a private protected space where the family controls it, right? From our traditions. But children are at risk in the home too, in a lot of ways. So it's just good to know that this is something people are working on.
Anybody else have questions or comments for our speakers?
I would like to say something really quick. Sorry. Hi everyone. Sorry, my camera's not working right now, but I want to say thank you so very much for your presentations. They were so scholarly. I love to see your passion behind your projects. And I have a quick question, and one or both of you could answer that. Um, but did you have a particular was this just a passion project of a topic that you saw that really spoke to you as you were doing your research? Or is there a particular personal reason why you chose these topics in particular? And maybe want to go into that a little bit? No pressure though.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always wanted to work with kids. I've always been really interested in the rights of children, or lack thereof. But it does not hurt that my daughter is 6. And there is a really concerning trend of, uh, if you ask kids now, what do you want to be when you grow up? A huge number of them have started saying an influencer. It's a really big trend right now. Like they used to say, I want to be a ninja or a doctor or a butterfly unicorn princess or whatever. And I still get that. I still get that answer sometimes, but a lot of them want to be influencers and they go into this world and don't realize what they're getting into. And that's really scary for me. And um, there were a lot of really interesting documentaries that just kind of happened. They just showed up across my feed as Dr. George presented this project. And so there was this really interesting moment of, oh, snap. I thought these children were way more protected than they are. Because what I've discovered is there are hardly any protections for child influencers. Um, and sometimes parents are well-meaning and they don't realize what they're getting into, and then they get stuck. And before they know it, they're in a situation that they never planned for. And some of them are bad parents. There's no way around that. Um, so I think I just got really fascinated by not only why would you choose to make money off your child, like what is the impetus for that, but also why do we as a society love that? Why do we click on kids? What is it about their content that's so interesting and that makes so much money? Like that's just very interesting to me. Um, and so the more I dig, the more I find, and the more I find, the more interested I am. It's kind of where I've landed.
It certainly is a career path potential because it's such a hot button issue right now and really an emerging issue that society has yet to figure out. And I'll say as the chief social worker in this Zoom, that last slide that you did in terms of the micro, meso, and macro, the practice alternatives, that can create a career for you, right? And because this movement needs a social worker very badly to help identify and make sure that people are trained on those micro, meso, and macro opportunities, because that was your creation. You didn't necessarily cite that from anywhere. You pulled all of those resources together and created that. And that really is publishable, beyond the Creating Change Journal. And so I'm just super proud of you. And it is a great, it's right on that confluence you said of times. And Takajya's work is also pretty inspired. Do you want to talk about why you chose the movement, Takajya, and respond to that question too?
Yeah, I think it's just something I've been constantly kind of learning about mass incarceration, and that kind of got me to the abolition movement because my bachelor's is in criminal justice. So the numbers, I'm constantly looking at the numbers when I got my bachelor's, and then I started, just watching documentaries and the horror stories that you hear out of these prisons, and it's constantly on the news, and they're constantly putting people in prison. You're like, well, something else could have been done for that. So that kind of got me into this movement since I got my bachelor's, which was years ago. So I've always been interested in the history of it all and how we got to this point because once you really get into it, it's really horrible because it's a massive problem that half of us are in prison or people in their families. We know people who have been to prison for small things. And it's, it's not a small amount of time, it's long periods of time. And then they come out of prison and they don't have opportunities to really even get themselves out of the situation that they're in. They can't get good jobs, so the entire system is a problem. And I like the abolition movement because it's not saying, oh, we just need to make the prisons better, or we just need to make policing better. No, we need to completely strip it and rebuild something different. So that's kind of why I got into that movement.
I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that perhaps the worst thing a political candidate can be accused of is being soft on crime.
Mhm.
So abolishing prisons or even scaling back our culture of that incarceration isn't very popular right now, in part not only because of political implications, but because there's a lot of money to be made in prisons and in influencing as well. But what do you think is the best argument against that we're being soft on crime accusation?
I think I think language is so important when you talk about it. Because the soft on crime thing has been a thing since Ronald Reagan and the war on drugs, and they started that in that era, but people were poor. People were, if we change the conversation to being soft on from being soft on crime to, oh, how many mental health facilities do you have in your county, your city, or are we putting enough money into education? Like, I think the language around it need to change before actual change can happen. And then you have all these organizations who are trying to, implement change, but they're fighting against the politicians at the same time. So I think, it's really up to the politicians to change the language, and it needs to be multiple people changing it. And, I think that's the biggest thing. We need to change how we talk about the prison system, policing. We need to change it to more of a human thing, make it more humane, I think is the language that we need to change it to. And once we make everything more humane, invest in these institutions, I think you will see that we are dropping from people going into prison. It'll fix itself in a way, but it takes time and it takes people changing the language and it takes looking at crime differently, I think.
I'll just say great answer to a really tough question. Right? And yeah, it is the long arc of justice. And I will just say Angela Davis would be proud of you. And also like in the 60s when Angela Davis, right, when this was happening, people of color were still on the outside of major systems, right? And because that was before the Civil Rights Act, and they were still pushed out of higher education, they were pushed out of government jobs. And now that's not necessarily the case, right? And we have more people like you, right, that have those advanced degrees that are working within the system. And I wonder what would happen if we, like with people of color within the system, if that new wave towards prison abolition, if we could wake that up somehow. And, and I do think we're probably going to have to drive off the cliff, which is where we're headed with all the ICE detention facilities and everything. Like it's about to, like, are we just going to incarcerate everyone? Which some people might want that, but hopefully change will be coming soon, because when we start warehousing children in for-profit prisons simply because their parents could not survive in their home country and tried to come here, like that's a whole different type of incarceration, that I don't think our society is going to tolerate for very long. Um, we'll see though. But good job. Anybody else? We've got about 8 more minutes. Does anybody else? Lori, did you have a comment?
I did. I mean, first of all, great job with the presentations. I really enjoyed listening to both of them, and really enjoyed seeing the zines. But a question for both of you, because I think that both of these are issues that certainly raise a lot of concern. And for whatever, Takajya, one of the things I thought of when I listened to yours was there was a protest song that was very popular back in the 60s that was "Raise the Prisons to the Ground." It was part of the kind of the Joan Baez kind of movement, but it was about the fact that the thing at that time, even then, was we should just raise it. And but my question is, these are serious things, and obviously a lot of concern for both these issues. But in your research, what's one bright spot that you found in both the research? Kind of one of the things that you looked at that kind of made you go, okay, here's kind of maybe something that made you feel hopeful.
I think what made me feel hopeful for my movement is the pushback. Like people aren't, this movement hasn't gone away. It's here, and I think it's really here to stay because you have so many people fighting, especially I just use Nashville for example because I'm here. But if you could just see like those accounts that I showed in my PowerPoint, like they are really fighting. They're educating people on abolition. They're asking you to come out. I know in Nashville they host like settings where you can come and watch documentaries. You can come and learn. Like the fight is still alive and well, and I think that's what kind of inspired me, especially being here in Nashville and seeing that, oh, Nashville is a part of the fight too. Like they are here. So I think I enjoy learning about the organizations that's really boots on the ground. So it's alive and well, this fight. It's a long time, but I'm glad to see that, it's not going anywhere.
Mary, you want to answer that?
Yeah. If I don't get a chance to say it later, Takajya, great job. You did amazing.
Thank you, girl. You too.
I think oddly, kind of the bright spot for me, and it's something I think that Takajya and I have in common with our movements, is there's this recognition that the core problem is that we are dehumanizing people, that we are turning people into a commodity. I think about a quote that I don't know where my dad got it from. He told me later, but if you're not paying for a service, then you are the product. And the pushback and the growth in my movement is often coming from the young people who are the product. And that's actually very hopeful for me. They're taking some ownership. There's this really interesting, like Shreya Nalamothu is really inspiring to me. She contacted her senator at 13 and she said, "Nah, I'm not doing this. This is not something that I'm interested in. I am not, and other children are not for sale in this way." And that's very hopeful for me. And then there's also a lot of like connected research about addiction to internet and technology, especially for young people. And there's another super interesting political movement that's kind of happening with young women who are starting to build cyber decks as a pushback against this this community or cultural expectation that their attention and their time is for sale. And that's really hopeful to me to have young people pushing back in that way. Yeah.
The wild world we live in these days, right? Any other comments? Questions, Meg? Go ahead.
I thought one thing that really hit me was this comment that children were saying they want to be influencers when they grow up, or influencers now, right? And when you said that, like we talked about things that children wanted to be like in the past, oh, ballerina, and they weren't necessarily realistic. We wanted to be astronomers and ballerinas and things, and that, not that people don't do those things, but not a lot. Or even if kids say, I want to be a pro basketball star or pro football star. But what's different and what's, I think, so interesting but scary culturally is, if you think back 50 years ago, the amount of media product that featured children as the sort of star or doing a job, like there was very little, right? You had, yes, Shirley Temple movies, and of course Shirley Temple Black advocated heavily for safety protections when she became an adult. But then there was cartoons, there's cable, and then cable TV, and then the internet. when we were kids, we couldn't consume child-focused content 24 hours a day or every hour we were awake. And if we did, it wasn't all featuring actual live children as the star moneymaker. And so when you combine that, it's not any surprise kids want to do. It's absolutely the logical result of this is the number one occupation they see, and it's the only occupation they see that features people their age as opposed to their family members that are working who are adults. So when you combine that with a culture that puts money above all, then it's completely understandable and even rational on the part of the children. The exception is going to be the child who doesn't respond to that, not the one who does, because this is everything that the culture is saying to them. So that makes it such a scary dominant force. It's a scary time, but it's no surprise, and I have heard kids say exactly that, because what else would they say? That's right there in front of them. It seems like the most accessible thing, and people do it from their house or their car or their backyard, right?
And it all looks so fun, right? But
Yeah, I
that's
was
editing and clever angles and and being a content creator is actually not easy. Right. And it's quite laborious, and you get run off from a lot of places trying to make it look authentic in public, and they don't want you there. And yeah, it can be hard. I had a brief stint as a content creator where people had approached me and I made like $1,700 off of one image that I sold on social media. But that one image of myself as a grown ass woman, and I had my mohawk and makeup and an army jacket, but I was modeling the jewelry, and that I got more harassment from that picture, and it was people wanting me to do it was sexualized, right? And I was like, wait, I don't. $1,700 isn't enough, to compensate me for what this is going to put me through. And I couldn't imagine being a child, or a parent that's struggling to pay their bills, and they have to decide between, am I going to allow my child to, I can protect my child, I can buffer them from the harassment if this will keep us housed. I mean, and sometimes making those decisions can be really hard in this complex world we live in. Right. But I want to close out. It is 1 o'clock on the dot. And so, to respect everybody's time, thank you all so much for coming. And thank you to both of my students for doing such great work and then having the intellectual courage to share it in public. The new journal will be ready. It's probably going to be right around the 1st of May. But you can hit this little follow button here on the web page, and it will alert you when the new issue comes out, and you will be able to read both of their full papers very soon. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day.